The contractions started at 4 in the afternoon, while I was folding the tiny white onesies my mother had sent from Multan. Denial was at work, 40 minutes away, and I called him with my hand pressed against the kitchen counter, breathing through the wave the way the doctor had shown us. "Go to my mom's place first," he said. "It's closer. I'll meet you at the hospital from there." That single sentence would replay in my head for years, not because it was unusual, because it sounded so reasonable. His mother's house was 8 minutes from ours. The hospital was 22 minutes past that. It made sense to stop, to have someone with me, to not labor alone in a parked car while my husband fought traffic. I drove there myself, one hand on the wheel, one hand on my belly, telling myself this was fine, this was normal, this was what families did for each other. I rang the doorbell at 4:40. Razia, my mother-in-law, opened the door in her house clothes, a dupatta loose around her shoulders, the smell of fried onions behind her. She looked at me, at my face, twisted mid-contraction, at the overnight bag in my hand, and she did not step aside. "Beta, we're in the middle of something," she said. "Hina's engagement photos are being chosen tonight. The whole family is here." Hina was my husband's younger sister. I could hear voices behind Razia, laughter, the clink of teacups, someone's phone playing a song on speaker. I could see, past her shoulder, my sister-in-law Hina sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a laptop, surrounded by aunts comparing photographs. "I'm in labor," I said, in case the word hadn't traveled past the doorway. "Denial told me to come here first." "He didn't tell me anything," Razia said. She wasn't unkind exactly. She was distracted, the way you're distracted by a guest who arrives at an inconvenient hour. "Sit in the car a little, Beta. Let me ask him." She closed the door most of the way, not all the way, but enough that I understood I wasn't being invited in. I stood on the step with another contraction rising, my hand flat against the brick wall of a house I had visited every Eid for 6 years, and I listened to my own breathing turn ragged while, faintly, behind the door, I heard one of the aunts ask Hina if she preferred the maroon lehenga or the gold one in the photographs. I called Denial again. He didn't pick up. I sat in my car in their driveway for 11 minutes, timing contractions on my phone, before the door opened again. It was Hina this time, holding her own phone, mildly annoyed. "Why are you still here?" she said. "Not a question. Just go to the hospital. We're busy. Can someone come with me?" "Everyone's busy," she said, already turning back toward the house. "Denial will meet you there." I drove myself to the hospital. 22 minutes, alone, gripping the wheel through 3 more contractions, parking crookedly across 2 spaces because I couldn't think straight enough to care, walking into the emergency entrance bent slightly forward, asking the woman at the desk for a wheelchair in a voice that didn't sound like mine. Denial arrived 90 minutes later. By then I was already in a gown, already hooked to a monitor, already alone in a room with strangers checking my blood pressure and asking who they should call if anything went wrong. He came in apologizing about traffic on the ring road, about a client call he couldn't step out of, and he kissed my forehead and held my hand for the rest of it, and in the exhaustion and the relief of finally not being alone, I let the afternoon blur into something I told myself I'd deal with later. Our daughter was born at 11:17 that night. I named her Myra after no one, because I wanted one thing in that hospital room that belonged only to me. Nobody from Denial's family came to see us for 3 days. When they finally did, Razia walked in carrying a small embroidered cap for the baby and a tray of sweets, beaming, asking to hold her granddaughter, and I watched the room fill with cousins and aunts taking photographs, cooing over Myra's fingers. And not one person mentioned a closed door, a driveway, or 11 minutes alone with no one beside me. I held my daughter and I smiled for the photographs, because that is what you do, and I said nothing, because I genuinely did not yet know what there was to say. It would take me 4 more months to understand that the silence in that hospital room had not been an accident. It had been a decision, made quietly, by people who assumed I would never find out it was one. The thing about families like Denial's is that they don't announce their hierarchy. You learn them the way you learn the layout of a house in the dark, by walking into the same corner twice. I noticed it first in small things. The way Eid gifts were distributed, Hina's always wrapped first, mine handed over almost as an afterthought, still in the shopping bag. The way Razia referred to the house, meaning the family home Denial's father had left behind, as though it would naturally pass to Hina one day, despite denial being the elder son. The way every family decision seemed to route through a group chat I had been added to but never quite belonged in, my messages met with single thumbs-up emojis while entire conversations happened elsewhere, in calls I wasn't on. I asked Denial about it once, gently, in our 2nd year of marriage. He laughed it off. That's just how my mother is with everyone at first. She'll come around. She did not come around. What I came to understand, slowly, was that Razia hadn't disliked me. She had simply never decided I mattered enough to require her attention. There's a particular kind of dismissal that doesn't come from anger. It comes from someone genuinely not considering you a variable in their planning. The day I went into labor, in the middle of choosing engagement photographs, I hadn't been an inconvenience worth fighting. I had been background noise. Denial, for his part, occupied the comfortable position of a son who loved his wife and loved his mother, and had never once been forced to choose between them, because his wife had never made him. I had absorbed every slight quietly, the way I'd been raised to, the way my own mother had absorbed slights from a mother-in-law 30 years earlier, telling herself that patience was a kind of strength. I started keeping a private folder on my phone, not out of any plan. At first it was just dates, the Labor Day, the names of people who'd been in that house, a screenshot of a text Denial had sent that afternoon saying go to my mom's place first. I told myself I was keeping it so that someday, if anyone ever asked, I could remember it accurately. I didn't yet know I was building something. There was a particular afternoon, when Myra was about a year old, that I think back to more than any other. It was a small thing. It always is with families like this. Nothing big enough to confront, everything big enough to remember. We were at Razia's for a Sunday lunch, the kind that happened every few weeks, where the whole extended circle drifted in and out of the kitchen, and the living room sat half full of relatives discussing things I'd stopped trying to follow. Myra had just started pulling herself up on furniture, wobbling between the coffee table and the couch with the fierce, unsteady pride of a child discovering her own legs. Hina's son, Arman, 6 months older, was doing the same a few feet away. "Look at him," one of the aunts said, clapping for Arman as he took 2 stumbling steps unassisted. "Walking already, just like his mother, ahead of everyone." Myra took 3 steps of her own a moment later, holding onto nothing, and nearly fell into my lap laughing. I caught her, delighted, and looked up to share the moment, the way you do, hoping someone else had seen it too. Nobody had. The room was still talking about Arman. I told myself it didn't matter. Children walk when they walk. There was no ledger being kept, no real unfairness in a room full of relatives happening to be looking the other way at the right second. But it kept happening in shapes too small to name. Myra's first word was mentioned once, briefly, and the conversation moved on before I'd finished the sentence. Arman's first word had occasioned an entire round of phone calls to relatives in Karachi. I mentioned it to Denial that night, carefully, the way you test the temperature of water you already suspect is too hot. Do you ever notice that Myra sort of disappears in that house? Like she's there, but she's not quite seen? He frowned, genuinely puzzled, in the way of someone who had never once had to search a room for himself and come up empty. "I think you're reading into it. Mama loves Myra." I believe that, actually. I still do. Razia loved my daughter in the abstract, sentimental way grandmothers are supposed to, the way you love a photograph. It was the particular, attentive love, the kind that notices first steps and remembers favorite foods and asks about a child's day rather than her appearance, that seemed to flow in one direction in that family, toward Hina's son, with a current too gentle to fight and too constant to ignore. I didn't raise it again. Not because I'd let it go, but because I'd started to understand that raising it changed nothing. Denial would defend his mother, not out of disloyalty to me, but out of an inability to see what he'd never been trained to look for. So instead of arguments, I kept noticing. And the folder on my phone grew quietly, not as ammunition yet, just as evidence that I wasn't imagining the shape of the room I kept walking into. What changed everything was not a single event. It was an accumulation, the way water finds its way through stone slow, then suddenly through. It started with the house. Denial's father had died 4 years before I married into the family, and the house, a modest 2-story place in a quiet block, paid off, no mortgage, had technically been left to both children, Denial and Hina, in equal shares. According to what Denial had always told me, I'd never had reason to question it. We didn't live there. We had our own small flat across the city. Razia lived in the family house alone, and the unspoken understanding, repeated at every family dinner, was that it would eventually go to Hina, because Hina would need it for her married life, because Denial already had his own setup. Because that's simply what made sense to everyone except, apparently, the actual legal paperwork. I found out by accident, 8 months after Myra was born, sitting in our lawyer's office for an unrelated matter, updating our own wills now that we had a daughter. Our lawyer, a calm, precise woman named Farah Tariq, asked an offhand question about whether Denial had ever finalized the transfer of his share of his father's property, since it could affect how we structured our own estate planning. I went still. What transfer? It turned out that 2 years earlier, while I was 8 months pregnant and exhausted and barely tracking anything beyond my own swelling ankles, Denial had signed paperwork, at his mother's request, framed as a temporary, practical arrangement, transferring his half of the inherited property fully into Razia's name. The stated reason was tax simplification. The unstated reason, which became obvious only in hindsight, was that property solely in Razia's name could be willed to whomever she chose, without Denial's share complicating things. Denial had mentioned none of this to me. Not because he was hiding it maliciously, I came to believe, but because to him it had felt small, a piece of paperwork among many, handled in an afternoon and forgotten by evening. To his mother, I suspected, it had been the entire point. I didn't say anything to Denial that night. I sat with it instead, the way you sit with a bruise before you know how deep it goes, pressing gently to find the edges. What I did, instead, was call Farah back the next morning and ask her, in plain terms, what my actual position was as a wife, as a mother, under the law. Regarding property neither titled in my name nor acknowledged as ever having been partly mine through marriage. She explained it patiently. I had no claim to the house itself, but I had something else, something I hadn't thought to ask about until that conversation. A paper trail. Every renovation Denial and I had personally paid for during the 2 years before that transfer, a new roof after storm damage, a kitchen update Razia had specifically asked us to fund because, she'd said, family helps family, existed in bank transfers, invoices, and a contractor's signed receipts, all under our joint account. It wasn't ownership, but it was leverage, and more than that, it was proof, documented, dated, undeniable proof of exactly how much we had given to a house that was now being quietly positioned to exclude us entirely. I kept that information the way I kept the date of my daughter's birth. Filed. Waiting for its moment. Not out of vengeance, not yet. Out of something closer to clarity. I was no longer the woman standing on a doorstep timing contractions, hoping someone would let her in. I had simply, finally, started paying attention. Farah called me again about 2 weeks after that first meeting in her measured, unhurried way to ask whether I wanted to formalize anything, a notarized record of the contributions, something that would hold up cleanly if it ever needed to. I sat with the question longer than I expected to. Part of me wanted to let it go, to decide the money was a gift after all and the house was simply not mine to fight for. It would have been easier. Denial's family had a particular gift for making the easier path feel like the more dignified one, as though peace and submission were the same thing. But I thought about Myra pulling herself up on that coffee table unseen. I thought about 11 minutes on a doorstep. And I told Farah yes, formalize it, quietly, without telling anyone, because some decisions are worth making even if you never plan to use them. It took 3 weeks to gather everything properly, bank statements going back 4 years, the contractor's original invoices, even a few text messages from Razia herself, sent at the time, thanking us for covering the kitchen and promising, in her own words, that this house will always remember what you've done for it. I read that message a dozen times before I filed it away. It hadn't meant anything when she sent it. People rarely do mean the promises that cost them nothing to make. But it existed now, dated, in writing, and that was enough. I didn't tell Denial what I was building. Not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because I didn't yet know what kind of moment would call for it, and I'd learned by then that some truths land better when they arrive complete rather than in installments that can be argued with one at a time. The moment came 11 months later at Hina's wedding. It was, fittingly, a wedding that revealed everything the family had always been too polite to say aloud. The seating chart placed Denial and me at a table near the kitchen doors, 2 rows back from where Razia's siblings sat, while distant cousins I'd met twice occupied seats near the stage. Myra, not yet 2, fussed through the ceremony in my lap, while I watched Hina's in-laws toasted from the main table, watched Razia glow under the attention of relatives who called her such a devoted mother, watched the entire architecture of the evening confirm, gently and unmistakably, where I stood in this family's order of things. It was during the reception dinner, in the lull between courses, that Razia made her announcement, not loudly, not as a speech, but to the table of senior relatives near her, in the particular carrying voice some women use when they want something overheard without appearing to have said it directly. She was discussing, she said, finally finalizing her will. The house, she said, would go to Hina and her new husband to give them a proper start. Denial, she added with a small, generous smile in our direction, has always been independent. He doesn't need it the way she does. The table murmured approval. Several relatives nodded as though witnessing an act of wisdom rather than erasure. Denial's jaw tightened beside me, but he said nothing. He had spent 34 years not saying anything, and a wedding reception was not, in his calculation, the place to start. I stood up instead. Not dramatically. I didn't raise my voice. I asked, in a tone pitched for the table rather than the room, whether anyone present remembered the roof repair after the spring storms 3 years ago, or the kitchen renovation the year after that. A few relatives looked politely confused. Razia's smile thinned slightly. Those were gifts, she said. Things children do for their parents. They were, I agreed. Which is generous of us to have done, given that we own no part of the house we paid to repair. I let that sit for a moment. I only mention it because I have the invoices. All of them. Under our names, dated, paid from our joint account. I'd hate for anyone to think Denial contributed nothing to a home he was raised in, simply because the paperwork was rearranged 2 years ago while I was too pregnant to be consulted. The table had gone quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when something true has been said where only comfortable things were meant to be. Razia's eldest sister, a sharp, dry-witted woman named Shaheen whom I'd always liked and who had clearly never been told the full story, turned to Razia with open surprise. You transferred the property out of Denial's name? When was this? It was a tax matter, Razia said, too quickly. While I was in labor with our daughter, I added, mild as anything, your son was being told to send me to your house first because the family was busy choosing engagement photographs and couldn't be interrupted. I stood on your doorstep for 11 minutes. I drove myself to the hospital alone. I have never once mentioned that to anyone outside this family. I'm only mentioning it now because apparently this evening is for telling the truth about who has done what for whom. I did not raise my voice once. I have thought about that since, about how the quietest version of a true sentence often lands harder than a shout ever could. Nobody at that table said anything for a long moment. Hina, in her wedding clothes, looked between her mother and me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not defensiveness, but something closer to recognition, as though she were doing arithmetic she'd never been asked to do. Denial finally spoke, quietly, to his mother, in front of everyone. Is that true? The roof, the kitchen, we paid for those, and then you moved the deed? Razia did not answer him directly. She reached instead for her water glass, and the silence that followed was its own kind of confession. Nothing was resolved that night, not officially. Wills are not rewritten over wedding dinner, and houses don't change ownership because a room goes quiet. But something else shifted, something less visible and more durable. Shaheen, who held more quiet authority in that family than anyone gave her credit for, asked to see the invoices the following week. Denial, for the first time in our marriage, sat his mother down alone, without an audience to perform for. He told me about it afterward, in pieces, the way men sometimes recount things they're still processing themselves. He'd gone to her house on a weekday evening, while Hina was at her in-laws settling into married life, and he'd laid the question out plainly. Why had she let him believe a tax formality was the whole story? Why had she waited for a wedding dinner, of all places, to announce a decision she'd apparently been planning for years? Razia had reportedly tried, at first, to fold the conversation back into familiar shapes. She reminded him that she'd raised both her children alone after his father's death, that she'd sacrificed for years to keep the house running, that a mother's decisions about her own property were not, in the end, anyone's to question. "I'm not questioning your right to the house," Denial told her, in the version he repeated to me later. "I'm asking why you let me sign something without explaining what it actually meant. And I'm asking why nobody in that house thought it mattered that my wife was in labor on your doorstep." It was the second part, he said, that finally cracked something open. Razia had gone quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its usual certainty. She said she remembered the day, vaguely. The way you remember a Tuesday from years ago, Hina's photographs spread across the carpet, the noise of the house, a daughter-in-law standing at the door who would, she'd assumed, simply be fine. Because young women in labor generally were fine, because hospitals existed for exactly that reason, because in her own life no one had ever stopped what they were doing for her either. It wasn't an excuse, and Denial told her so. But it was, perhaps, the closest thing to an explanation she had ever offered for anything, not malice, but a kind of inherited carelessness, passed down through a lifetime of women who'd been taught that their own pain didn't merit interruption, and who had, without quite meaning to, taught the same lesson forward. I don't know exactly what else was said in that conversation. I know that 3 months later, Razia revised her will to include a fair accounting of the renovation costs as a debt against the estate, to be settled before any inheritance was distributed, not because she'd had some tearful change of heart, but because Shaheen, and eventually 2 other senior relatives, made clear they would not stand behind a version of fairness that erased it. I know that Denial began speaking up in rooms where he used to go quiet, not loudly, not as some sudden transformation, but in small, accumulating ways, correcting his mother once at a dinner, defending a decision of mine once in front of his sister, things that would have seemed unremarkable in another marriage and felt, in ours, like a door finally opening from the inside. Hina, surprisingly, was the one who sought me out first. She called about a month after her wedding, her voice careful in a way I'd never heard from her before, and asked if she could come by on her own, without Denial, without her mother, just the 2 of us and Myra. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink and told me, in pieces, that she hadn't fully understood what had happened the day I went into labor. She'd been 22, wrapped up in her own wedding planning a year early in the way young brides sometimes are, and her mother had simply told her I'd gone to the hospital and everything was fine, and she'd believed it because believing it required nothing further of her. "I didn't ask you to come back to the door," she said. "I should have. I was just annoyed you were interrupting." "You were 22, I said, looking at Lehenga photos. "That's not an excuse." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. But it's an explanation, and I'll take that if it's offered honestly." I meant it. There's a difference between a person who never thinks to examine themselves and one who eventually does, even years later, even after the damage is done. Hina, to her credit, was becoming the second kind. She asked, eventually, haltingly, about Arman and Myra, about whether she'd noticed the way attention moved unevenly between the 2 children at family gatherings. I told her the truth, plainly, without performing hurt I no longer needed to perform. She went quiet for a long moment, then said she'd talk to her mother about it, and for the first time in years I believed a promise made by someone in that family, because she didn't make it sound easy. It didn't fix everything overnight. The next few gatherings were still occasionally lopsided, old habits being what they are. But I noticed Razia, once, correcting herself mid-sentence at Eid, turning a comment about Arman's vocabulary into a question about what new words Myra had picked up that week. It was small. It was also, for that family, enormous. There was one more gathering, the following winter, that stayed with me longer than I expected. It was a small family dinner, nothing formal, held at Shaheen's house instead of Razia's for once. A quiet shift in geography that nobody commented on but everybody noticed. Myra was 2.5 by then, talkative, opinionated, prone to narrating her own movements through a room as though providing commentary for an audience only she could see. At some point she climbed onto the arm of the couch beside Shaheen, uninvited, the way toddlers do, and began telling her, in the half-formed sentences of a child, still assembling language, about a drawing she'd made that morning. Shaheen listened with the kind of attention I'd rarely seen given to my daughter in that extended family, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, clearly delighted. Razia, across the room, watched the 2 of them for a while before crossing over herself and sitting on Myra's other side. She didn't compete for the story. She simply waited until Myra finished, then asked to see the drawing too, and when Myra ran to fetch it from her bag, Razia turned to me, briefly, with an expression I hadn't cataloged from her before. Not quite an apology, something quieter. An acknowledgement, maybe, that she was only now learning to do something Shaheen had apparently always known how to do without effort. "She's quick," Razia said of Myra, watching her run back across the room with the paper held flat in both hands like something precious. I don't think I noticed how quick before. I didn't say anything sharp back. There was no need to anymore. I just said she was, yes, very quick, and let Razia have the moment of noticing, late as it was, because lateness is still better than never, and because I had learned, somewhere in the last 3 years, that holding on to every old injury forever was its own kind of trap, one I didn't particularly want for myself or for my daughter. I never asked for an apology about the day Myra was born, and I never got one in so many words. What I got, eventually, was something I valued more. At Myra's second birthday, held at our flat, Razia arrived early to help me set up, and at some point in the afternoon, unprompted, while we were alone in the kitchen, she said, "I should have opened that door." That was all. No elaboration, no performance of remorse for an audience, just 5 words, offered privately, which is, I've come to think, the only kind of apology some people are capable of giving, and sometimes the only kind worth trusting. I didn't say it was fine. It wasn't, and I've stopped pretending old wounds close just because someone finally names them. But I said thank you for saying that, and I meant it, and we moved on to slicing the cake, and Myra blew out 2 candles with the particular fierce concentration of a toddler who has no idea any of this history exists, or ever will need to. That, I think, is the quiet end of it. Not a courtroom, not a dramatic reckoning, just a woman who once stood outside a door learning, slowly and on her own terms, that the door was never the only way in.